Wisconsin in Cleveland, Ohio. This is All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Essman. Hello again, everybody. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. If you're new to the show, then scoot in a little closer because this is the podcast that's going to give you what you want to hear directly from med school admissions people. But not today. I'll get to that in a minute. I can't go any farther without thanking you for listening to my podcast and telling your friends about it. I can tell by the download data that the word is gradually getting out, so keep telling your friends and classmates and pre-med clubs, your posts on Reddit, SDN, Insta, wherever. Also, hey, if you're digging what you've been hearing, swipe me 5 stars and leave a comment if you would. It totally helps, especially in Apple Podcasts, where it helps get more exposure in reaching new listeners. Also, hey, I can't go any farther without giving a big hello to Dom from Chicago and Leo from Miami, who are listeners of the show and came to interview recently at our school. I gotta say, this kind of recognition still just blows my mind. I really only thought that maybe my mom and some of her lady friends would listen to the podcast, but clearly this has gone beyond my mom. So I'm always gathering listener questions too to discuss with my guests. So if you have an admissions related question, please email me at allaccess@case.edu. It's super easy. I'm actually working on setting up an episode with some past admissions deans and director guests, some familiar voices, where we're going to just go and just do a whole episode of answering listener questions. So load me up with your questions. Right now, med school admissions offices around the country are swimming in applications and running interview days. So it is about the absolute busiest time of year for us. Consequently, I've hit a little bit of a lull in med school admissions guests, but not to worry. I have guests lined up over the next 3 weeks from Washington State, the University of Washington, and UC Irvine, finally breaking into California and the West Coast. So stay tuned for those. They're coming down the road. So before we dive into today's episode, I have had people ask me, where are these show note thingies that you're talking about during conversations with your guests? I will frequently make a comment during a conversation like, oh, I'll be sure to put that link in the show notes. If you're using Apple Podcasts on your iPhone, you can click on the word details and it will take you to notes, info, and links from the episode. So I can't say exactly where it is on Android, but I have to think it has a similar process. Okay, instead of making you wait another couple weeks for an episode about another medical school, I thought that I'd bring you kind of a bonus episode to hold you over. This show is a conversation with one of our current case med students about interviewing at medical schools. Since we're in the thick of interview season, and I was thinking that if you're in the process of interviewing or just want to hear what to expect someday in the future, that you might find the reflections and tips about interviewing from a med student perspective really helpful. So today, I have Megan Cavateo, who is a first-year med student here at Case Western and was just interviewing a year ago. So these experiences are still really fresh in her mind. So I hope you like this episode. And with that, we're going to jump right into it with Megan. Well, Megan, thanks for coming in to do this. I really appreciate it. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, for the people that are listening don't know our relationship. Not only is Megan a student here, obviously, but I had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing you last year. Mm-hmm. And I told you when we were talking about this the other day that you crushed your interview, in my opinion. And it was like, I was thinking, she can't leave. You can't leave. So when
you're so sweet.
I know when we got to the point where you got accepted, I thought, oh God, she's got to come here. And then I remember you came to Second Look Weekend and I'm like, oh, this is a good sign. And then April 30th came and that was, or like the choose your enrollment date came, whenever that was. And they're like, we got her. So there was a lot of fist pumps and high fives and stuff when that day came. So I'm really glad that you're here at our school. So
well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Very sweet. I'm so happy to be at Case. I really love this school.
Awesome. So we're talking today about I wanted Megan to come in because you have a lot of experience in interviewing. It was just a year ago you were doing this.
Yeah, it feels like longer, but it was just a year ago.
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to structure our conversation kind of in 3 chapters. We'll talk about logistics of interviewing, like how to get there and some tips and stuff and things you kind of learned along the way. Mm-hmm. And then we'll talk about like how you prepared for interviewing and getting all your stuff together and kind of mentally getting ready and all the things you needed to do. And then like reflecting, like lessons learned, things you know now that you wish you would have known then, or things you worried about then that you probably didn't need to worry about, stuff like that. So, but why don't you tell us kind of your background? I mean, you're from California, you end up at Whitworth. Like, how did all that, just a little background?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, I'm a first-year medical student at Case. So I did my undergraduate degree at a little teeny tiny school in Spokane, Washington called Whitworth.
How did you wind up there?
Yeah. So being from California, I was someone who, I knew I wanted to be a doctor from a very young age. So I, have been thinking about this for a long time. So when I was looking at colleges, I knew I wanted to look for a school with a very good pre-med program. I knew I wanted a small school that had good, personal connections with your professors, to be able to, get help from them, get opportunities from them, get good letters of recommendation for them when the time comes, and just wanted a place where I could feel really at home. And then just being from Southern California, most of the schools in California are very big. You have the big UC system. I didn't want to go to a school with 40,000 people. So I was looking more in the Northwest. I did look a little bit at the East Coast, but I didn't want to go maybe too far away from home yet. But I was looking at schools in the Northwest, and Whitworth was one of those schools that just hit all those boxes. They had a good pre-med program. They had a strong science department. Everyone was super friendly and nice and helpful when I was doing my application process, and when I went and visited to go look at the school before I applied, and afterwards when they did a little get to know the school day after you were accepted. So it was just a really good fit all around.
Did you go and visit there?
I did. In a lot of schools had one of those. It was a Y Whitworth day.
Yeah.
So I went, I think, in March or something, after
cool.
I'd applied and was looking to see where I wanted to end up.
So what'd you major in?
I double majored in biology and chemistry, and I got a minor in Spanish.
Wow. And then you took a gap year, right?
I did.
Why did you decide to do that?
So something that at Whitworth that our pre-med committee advised was that it was a really good idea to take a gap year. It was much more common now. When I first came to college, I was okay, so, I'm just going to go straight into medical school. That's just the way things go. And then by the time I got into college, everyone was kind of saying how nowadays it's just much more common to take gap years, and just with everything you have to do for your application, just to make sure that you're as solid of an applicant as you can be. It's hard to fit everything you want to do in 3 years. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to have that extra 4th year to make sure that I was able to get in all those activities and leadership and research and everything that I wanted to do, and make sure I could be the best applicant I could be. Mm-hmm. So it was partly I knew for what I want to do, I need to take the time. And then also our pre-med committee really encouraged us to take that gap years to have a little bit of fun after college and not just jump straight into school and then be in school for the next, 4 years and then plus residency. So just to have some time just to not be in school, which I actually really loved. It was nice. What did you do again?
Remind me what you did. I don't remember what you did during gap year.
I worked in the ER as a medical scribe.
Oh, that's right.
So I did that. And then another fun thing I did was I worked at a winery.
Oh, that's right. Yes. I was thinking wine, but I didn't want to go. Didn't you work at a winery? But then you're no, that must have been somebody else.
Nope. I worked as a taste room server in a small winery in Southern California. So that's
right.
I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't take a gap year, because I would never have had another opportunity.
Oh,
and it was awesome. It was much more fun. I loved scribing, but it was much more fun than scribing. And I got to, talk to really interesting people every day who would come in from out of town and, talk to them about wine. Everyone was really happy, and everyone was, wine tasting just a fun, relaxing activity. And it's an interest of mine, something that I study on my own. So it's
that's
great.
Cool. Well, you look back now, I'm sure you're happy that you took the gap year.
Yes.
And do you recommend it to people if that's kind of on their mind?
I do. I definitely feel after just a couple weeks into my gap year, I was wow, this is the first time since I was 3 years old that I have not been in school and will not be in school for the next year. And so that's just like a weird like headspace to be in. It was really nice just to be able to go and be like, I, would go to work and I would come home and I didn't have to study. I didn't have to, I'd already taken my MCAT. So that was all done. I mean, besides from, I was in the middle of the application process, but after, secondaries were in like, July-ish, I still had the whole rest of the year and I could just, spend time with friends from back home, work on, other hobbies, like just have free time that I didn't have to worry about and feel stressed that I wasn't studying. I wasn't, I could volunteer if I wanted to, I could do other stuff, but like really I just took time for myself and I knew that I wouldn't get as much of that once I started medical school. So I liked it. It was good.
What did your parents think when you first kind of brought this up? Were they worried that you were going to lose momentum and end up not going to med school, or did they not care? They just kind of trusted you?
No, I think because they had known I was one of those people. So like I said, since I was 5 years old, wanted to be a doctor. So they knew I was pretty certain, but they definitely were a little surprised. They were like, oh, gap years. That's kind of weird. But once I explained to them that kind of just the way that the med school application process works now, it's more conducive to a gap year. And like, there's a lot of my classmates who didn't take gap years and are doing great and we're happy. And there's a lot of my classmates who took at least one, and lots of them took multiple gap years who really enjoy being able to work in other fields or just, improve their application or do things that they wouldn't be able to do once they started medical school.
There was a recent thread on a listserv that all the admissions people are on nationally. And the question was, what percentage of your class did not take a year or greater after graduation? And most people were saying like 30% of their classes had not taken a year or greater. Yeah. So like, 70% of people's classes, this is just, there were some people who said 50%, or 40%, but most schools were kind of saying like 30% did not take a gap year or did not take a gap year. So most students, this is more, like you said, it's really more common now, even in the last few years since you started when you were in college. Yeah,
I think it's just good for like your own, like, personal and like mental health, and also just for your application if you want to. And if you were able to get all that stuff done in 3 years and you're really ready to go, like that's great too. I just like wasn't one of those people, and I'm really glad I took at least 1 year. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about logistics. And you were pretty well traveled. Like you and I spoke the other day, and you went on multiple interviews. Yeah. So I felt like you are a well-seasoned kind of person that to bring in to talk about this, because you kind of have a little broader perspective. And so that way, even if somebody gets one interview, which is amazing. Yeah. This kind of information can help you with the one interview you have coming up in planning and preparing and that kind of thing. So first of all, costs. I mean, the application process is already enormously expensive, but when you start tacking on travel costs, do you remember kind of how much you think you spent?
Yeah. So I know that I think spent at least a couple thousand. I think it was closer to like 3,000-ish just on interviews. I was lucky. I went on a lot of interviews, and also being from California, most of the interviews I got were on the East Coast or the Midwest. And so, I think all but one of the interviews I went on, there was one in Arizona, and then the rest of them were all, there was one in California, one in Arizona, and the rest of them were all Midwest or East Coast. Wow. So you can't drive to that. So they're all flights. And then with flights comes, the prices vary based on time of year and interview season. The height of it is right around holiday season. So that kind of compounds those factors. So that was definitely something to consider and make sure that you plan for, because a lot of unexpected costs can come up. What
about, like, how much notice were you given for some of these interviews? Was it like you were like, hey, you're going to interview in 2 weeks kind of thing?
I think it was probably around, I would say on average, like 3 to 4 weeks. I definitely got some where it was like, okay, like I think my first one, it was like, okay, in 2 weeks, like this is the time slot we have for you.
So they told you?
Yeah, I think I had one or two where they gave you the date, or they gave you a couple options, but they were all pretty soon. And then I had a lot of them, they had like a portal where you could go and you can look through a bunch of dates.
Yeah, it's like
cases was like that. You could go look through and kind of pick and choose the dates that were available out of the entire interview season. So it varies a lot from school.
I've asked some friends at other med schools that send dates out and say they tell you, Megan, you have an interview on November 1st. And if that doesn't, I asked them, like, what if that doesn't work for Megan? Can she call? And they're like, oh yeah, like applicant can call us and say, I've got a big test that day, or I have this conflict. Am I going to be out of town? But for them, they like to do the scheduling and try to stack their days.
Yeah, which makes sense depending on the school.
So if you get an interview date designated to you, don't be afraid to call if it doesn't work well for you. Yeah. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Because I think some applicants are afraid to, because you got it. You're afraid.
Yeah, you're afraid of making them.
They're not going to pull the rug out from underneath you.
If I say no, they're just going to be like, well, guess, never mind.
Sorry.
Then.
So what about like tips that you came up with? So you had to fly everywhere.
Yes, I had to fly.
So what kind of hacks did you use to save money?
Yeah, so like after the, I think the second one, I got TSA PreCheck, which if you guys don't know, it basically lets you get into a separate security line that bypasses a lot of the hassle. It's like $85-ish for 5 years. So it works out to like less than $20 a year. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. If you buy it now, you'll have it again. You'll have it through when you have residency interviews.
Right.
So point. And then what if you have to fly home for family to go see Hall? Like you'll have it for 5 years.
The thing about that, it takes about I think 2 weeks to 30 days to get that back. So you have to kind of, you don't get it immediately. Yeah. You have to go to a TSA site or like a location where they could turn in your fingerprints or something.
Yeah,
I remember going and doing it.
Yeah, it's like they take a picture and you fingerprints. They do you basically give them all of your
It's a little bit of a process, but my gosh, when you get to the airport and the one line for everybody else is like out the door and the TSA line is
half the time there's no one there. You just walk straight through, don't take off your shoes, don't have to unpack your bag.
You think great. Like this was the best money I think I've ever spent. So TSA PreCheck. What about so you had to find a lot of flights. What did you do? Like what were you looking on to get cheap flights?
Yeah. So honestly, my parents helped me a lot with this because they are a lot more experienced with buying flights. So my mom gave me some tips of they had they had a Southwest credit card. So she was always looking on Southwest also, they usually have, at least again, for being from California, that was kind of like the hub there. So, and they had cheaper flights for me through their other apps and websites like Hopper or Kayak are things that we used a lot as well. And just like looking through Google Flights and kind of comparing across airlines. Like even if you always fly, say United, you don't know if like Alaska or like Delta is going to be cheaper on those days. And then like, depending on how much wiggle room you get to look for flights. Like if you have your interview in 2 weeks, you don't really have a lot of room, but if you can schedule, if you happen to have it, it's like a 2 months out, like wait a little bit and like kind of price compare is really helpful. Because that was the hardest thing, was being like, okay, well, I have this flight in the middle of, holiday season and this is what the prices are. And it's either like I don't go or I pay this money.
Now, I know some of this stuff seems a little obvious to some people, but I think I've met some applicants like this is their first time maybe on their own setting up their own travel plans. And maybe growing up, if they went on vacations with family, like mom and dad handled everything and you just sat in the backseat of the car and just asked like, when are we there? Are we there yet? Kind of thing. But for some people I've met, like this is their first time really traveling and doing it on their own. And so some people might be thinking like, oh, I totally know this stuff. But this is more so for other people maybe that aren't as well versed in setting up travel and some of these ins and outs. So if you get multiple interviews, did you try to like piggyback? Like did you try to like, stack them a little bit? Yeah,
especially some of those East Coast ones. I think I had 2 or 3 weeks, different weeks where I would have 2 interviews during the same week. So I'd fly to one East Coast city, the day before, do my interview the next day, and then that evening fly out to the next city, wherever that was across the country, and then the next night or the next day do that interview and then fly home. And then it cuts off, one of those connecting flights where if you had flown all the way back home and all the way back there, and usually flights are a bit cheaper if you're going smaller distances. So if you can get those interviews closer together, or if you have ones that are like in the same city, like lots of cities have multiple medical schools. And you can't really control that. You can't really control when they get back to you. But if you do, you can try to rearrange them or call the school. Even if you already
do that? Did you call any schools or email them and say, hey, I'm going to be in the area?
I didn't actually, but I probably could have. But I think it just, the way that it worked out, and I think the schools that I had heard back from and the timing, it
worked out.
For me, it just worked out.
I will say that we get some emails from people that we've invited to interview, and they look on we kind of close our calendar off for certain dates. We just kind of open up a month at a time kind of thing. We've had some applicants call us and say, I've been invited to interview. I'm already going to be in Ohio in December, but December's not open. Do you have some dates there that I might be able to coordinate with you? And we're like, oh yeah, we just haven't opened those up yet. So I think people should feel comfortable. If you've been invited for an interview, call and see if you can work it out if you're going to already be in that area of the country. But also too, we've been getting a lot of emails lately from people saying, I'm already been invited to interview at a school near you, and I'm coming from California, or I'm coming from, far away. Can you, and I haven't heard from you yet. So so we try to look at people a little bit, but that's also they're in a queue to be reviewed.
Yeah.
So we try to accommodate a little bit. It doesn't always, we can't promise you're going to be invited for an interview, but we do get, you're trying to save money.
I think it's something that it can't hurt. Usually admissions people are very nice people. They want to help you out. And like, if it's something where, you have a situation where like it's going to be really expensive, you're not worried. It's like, if either I can make this work and piggyback these interviews or I can't go. I think explaining that to the admissions people is worth a shot. And if they're able to, look through your file earlier, that's great. If, it doesn't work out, then at least you tried. Nothing lost.
Ask that, try to be honest when you're doing that. Not like I haven't heard, and now I'm going to I'm going to pretend I'm going to be in the area. Or if I do get invited for an interview, I actually will be in the area. So
be honest. Don't try to take advantage of them. That's never going to end well.
So you said that you did Southwest and you kind of liked them. Well, not only was that's a big airline for Southern California, but they have no rescheduling fees. Yeah,
that's at least something that like I had found. Like when I think I did change one or two of my interview dates, but I don't think I had to call. I think they had like their portal open. And so I was able to just like rearrange the dates, and at least when doing that through Southwest or however way I booked it, they were able just to like use the credit.
Yeah.
So whereas I think United, if I tried to do that, there was a rebooking fee, which was difficult.
You get kind of hosed on that.
Yeah. So just looking into those like fine prints of the airlines.
Did you do any of the discount airlines?
I did not. I had heard a lot of really, really bad horror stories. Those discount airlines like Spirit or like those other ones are generally the first to get bumped if there's any sort of delays in the airport. I had one friend who like they had, some early morning flight, not for interviews, but just for a general like vacation. They had used Spirit and they had some early morning flight and they just kept pushed back and hours and hours. And then they just finally canceled it that day. So like,
and that's it.
And that's your interview. Like if you're coming in the day before or even the evening before, like there's not a lot of wiggle room. And for something as important as a medical school interview, which maybe you can, try to call and like reschedule. I actually had to do that once. One of my flights was delayed, of a major airport and using a major airline, and it got delayed and to the point where it was an evening flight. And it was one of those ones where I had piggybacked the interviews and it got canceled and I had to call the admissions office, but, and it worked out, but trying to reduce the chance of that happening as much as possible.
Because I know some of those discount airlines, they're great. Obviously, you're saving a lot of money, but if they cancel that flight, they might only fly like every Thursday, or every Thursday and Sunday, and so they may not reschedule it. And they don't have alliances with other airline operators to say, well, we can put you on this other flight or, with a partner kind of thing.
They also just don't have the best, like their discount for a reason. Like the friend who like their flight got delayed, they got I think it was like a $20 voucher to reschedule their flight. Ooh. So it's not like you might not even get the refund. You might not get, help rescheduling your flight. So just be careful with that, I think. And if you are, maybe try to get in a day or two before. And if you really need to do that, just get more of a buffer.
And we were talking about people flying places, but obviously a lot of students drive to interviews. And so I see a lot of people. I've met a young woman one time who drove here from North Dakota.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, how long did it take you to get here? She's like 14 hours. So, and I've met students that have driven here from DC, which is about 6 hours and sometimes longer. Students will do that, but I mean, that's a real grind. I mean,
it's hard.
That's a long drive, and you're going to be tired.
And if you have to, and that's, sometimes you just have to do stuff like that. But if you have the option, I feel like making sure that you're well rested. Or
I've had students who they had a parent come with them. And the parent was able to kind of maybe take a day or two off.
Helpful, yeah.
And then they rode together in the car and they traded off driving. Yeah. So it was a little bit easier on the applicant because that can be exhausting. Okay, so we've gotten to the city where you're going to interview. Where'd you stay? Did you do, so there's usually student host options at most schools, and there's obviously hotels. What did you usually do?
I did a mix. So it was probably closer to like half and half of doing student hosts or hotels. I think a lot of it came down to like when I got the interview or if the school even offered student hosts. I don't know if every school does, but some schools might just like advertise it more than others. They might do it and you might just have to ask for it, as opposed to them when they send you your interview invite, giving you like a link to like a Google spreadsheet with interview hosts. So some of them I think just didn't mention it. So I just got a hotel. There's just the pros and cons to that of like, if you stay with a student host, it's great. It's usually free. You can talk to a current student. You get their perspective. You get to, I think, get a little bit more of a feel of like the city because you're staying with them in their apartment or in their house, and you get to see like how they're living and kind of get like, oh, could I picture myself doing this? You also, might be sleeping on an air mattress night before your interview. And if you're have difficulty sleeping, they might snore. Mm-hmm. You never know. Mm-hmm. And then, so maybe a hotel might just be a little bit more private, a little bit more comfortable. You can kind of control when you wake up, when you go to bed. If you're more introverted, then you don't have to feel stressed about talking to someone. If you're really stressed before your interview, you can kind of do your own thing, get relaxed on your own. It's kind of, I think, just more of like a personal preference. It definitely does help with costs, though. That definitely, like, hotels get expensive. And then even if, I don't know, some schools might not even have, hotels nearby that they could even go to, or the pricing might be too much.
Yeah. It's like especially like in an urban area, like a downtown area, like where it can be really expensive sometimes. I mean, like you were saying, there's some pros and cons to staying with students because like you said, you might wind up on a futon or an air mattress, which is fine. Yeah. But if you're looking, you want to make sure you get some good rest the night before the interview because it's a big day. But that's a trade-off there. And I will say, I've heard over the years, some crazy stories from our students about when people stay with them. And just, you need to remember that these are students that are opening their house to you, and you still need to be well behaved. This is not a time to be disrespectful or not courteous to them. I remember one time hearing one of our students came and says, she's like, I was late to school because of the student I hosted. Yeah,
that's stressful. It's stressful for you. Also, you have to remember it's stressful for the student too. She has school, or they have school.
She said we told her in the morning we have to leave by 7:30 because we have school at 8, and she's like, it was 7:55, and she was still in the bathroom blow drying her hair, getting ready for. So it was like things like that, like just not mindful about that.
Yeah.
One time we heard a guy came and he stayed with a host, and they got in the car in the morning, and he sat in the back seat like an Uber. So he got in the back seat, and he's like, because the student's like, hey, I'll give you a ride to school with me, and he's like, okay. And the front seat had no trash or something on it. And he just put his stuff in the trunk. And then he sat in the back seat. He said, so that's not disqualifying. It was just funny and it's odd.
It's a funny story. It's a little, I think just be nice. I've done some student hosting for prospective case interviewees since I've been here. So I've hosted some people since I've been here. And they've all been really nice. Yeah. I like it. It's something that I want to do to give back, because I remember how stressed I was before going to my interview. And I really liked my student hosting experiences when I was interviewing. I had some really good ones. They were always really nice girls who took the time to answer my questions and have a conversation with me about what they liked about their school, what they maybe didn't like, how they, chose their school, what are some of the really important, fun activities they get to do, how they like their classes, how they like their classmates. So I think definitely getting that perspective was nice. And so I think just making sure you're nice to your student if you do that choice, because it's definitely, it's something to be grateful for. You're saving a lot of money. They're helping you out. They're opening up their home to you. They're, maybe disrupting their schedule a little bit. Yeah. They have a lot of studying to do. Medical school is hard, but there's something that they want to help you out. So be grateful for that.
Saying thank you or writing them a thank you afterward or emailing them a thank you could go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one of those things where we're not interviewing or evaluating you as student hosts, but it doesn't hurt to be nice, and it doesn't hurt to just be just a genuine human being, just, as you normally would. And, maybe that person, you make a really good connection and they want to help you out. So it can't hurt.
Yep. What about, but if you stay at a hotel, Yeah, you and I were kind of doing a little bit of prep the other day. You were saying like, don't underestimate how far away you may be from campus.
Yes.
So you were kind of telling me your like the short story of your interview here, that the hotel that you stayed at was a little farther than you thought.
Yeah.
And then,
so for my case interview, like case, so obviously I do student hosting, but I think I just either hadn't seen it or just like felt like I was like, I'm just gonna do a hotel for this one. So I stayed at a hotel. I think it was like less than, I like mapped it out. It was, a couple blocks away, maybe like less than half a mile away. It was something supposed to only take like a 10-minute walk. Generally for my other interviews, I had either when I was staying with the student host, like had asked them if I could get a ride or like how that was going to work in the morning to walk or how far it was, or I just like took an Uber, even if it was just like a couple blocks, mostly just because like I was in heels and I had my suitcase with me and I didn't want to walk, half a mile in heels with my suitcase on my way to my interview and worry about getting all messed up or sweaty or tired before my interview. For case, I think I had mapped it out when I just was like, oh, I can walk.
It's around the corner.
Yeah, I don't know why. I should have gone an Uber. Yeah. I think I was like, no, I'm not going to spend $5 on an Uber. I'll just walk. And the directions were a little vague.
It was hard to find us in our old building. It was hard to find us.
We case recently switched buildings for their medical school. In the old campus, it was kind of a labyrinth of these really big buildings and then right next to their hospital. And so I got a little lost and it took me a little bit longer than I thought to get there. I made a wrong turn, or at least I thought I made a wrong turn. It was taking too long and I was like, I don't think this is where I'm supposed to be. And luckily, this very nice woman, I stopped her. I was like, hey, can you help me find the medical school building? And she walked me to where I was supposed to go. So she was very nice. That was a very good sign for case. But just something to think about is either to, if you do have the time, like try to at least use your phone to map it out. If you have more time, try to go maybe walk and see if you can find the building or where you're supposed to meet them. Or just take an Uber to whatever address they get to. And if you don't have to worry about getting your hair messed up or...
When you told me you arrived, you felt like I was the last one to get there.
I was the last person in my interview group.
Yeah.
I was someone who I got to every interview half an hour before so I could make sure I got there on time, that I was settled, that I was ready, use the restroom beforehand. I was prepared. And then that one, I was dragging my suitcase and it was humid and my hair, I have curly hair, my hair was all frizzy and I rushed to the bathroom to dab the sweat off of my forehead. During the initial curriculum intro talk, I think you were talking and I was in the front row and I was just trying to be okay, it's warm in here. So just basically be aware of how long it's going to take you in the morning. Plan your route. If you have, a student host to take you, ask if they drive or walk. If you don't feel comfortable walking that far, because, they're not going to be in a full suit. You could be interviewing in September and when it's hot. You could be interviewing in December when it's cold and they might be able to be in snow boots and their coat and you're not. So don't feel uncomfortable paying for a $5 Uber ride if it's not too much inconvenience for you financially. It's gonna be worth it.
And if the worst case scenario happens that you do wind up being late, your driver gets lost or you just, for whatever reason you're running late, call the admissions office. Yeah. Pronto, call them right away and say, I'm a little lost but I'm on my way. Don't not call, because we've had some students that we've had to track down because we get worried because we have them on a list they're supposed to be here and we haven't heard from them. Are they okay? We're just worried something's happened or whatever. And then they're like, well, I'm on the street and I'm what's around you? Tell us what's around you. Yeah. So just call us and tell us that you're running behind. We get it.
That's something too, if you are driving and if there's you obviously try to get there early, but sometimes there's just unexpected traffic. Yes. And things you can plan as much as you. I had another friend or someone I talked to on the interview process that I think they were driving and then they had planned to be there half an hour early, but then there was traffic and it just kept getting worse and worse. And they're getting there and they're getting so stressed. They're like, should I even go to this interview? I think definitely still go.
Yeah.
Call, see if there's anything you can do. Usually most interviews, you start off with like a welcome talk anyway. Like, yeah, you want to be there for the whole thing, but if that's the only thing you miss, like at least you got there and at least, you're safe and you're, if you call and you're proactive about that, I think that they will.
Pro tip.
Yeah.
Put the admissions office phone number in your phone so that you have it ready to go, or, just have it just in case it comes up. That way, if some emergency does arrive, then you don't have to go like try to find that email or find that website that has the admissions office number. Do your homework ahead of time and plug that number in. So that way, if something comes up, you can just, find it quickly in your contacts and ready to go. Let's talk about, okay, so we're there. You're at the interview. How did you get ready for these interviews? Like we're talking about preparing for interviews. So you submitted your application, maybe some interview invitations are coming. Now you have to start preparing. How did you practice getting ready for these?
Yeah. So I was someone who I had a lot of jobs before going on medical school interviews, but they were mostly like, jobs through my college. So I didn't necessarily have to like interview for. So this is one of I think maybe one of the first, if not the first times I had like a real high stakes, professional interview. So, some people, might think like, oh, I can talk about myself for an hour, but actually being able to answer those questions in a concise manner, in a confident manner, making sure that you, know your answers and you're prepared, takes some practice. So something that I did was I just went and Googled medical school interview questions. And there are hundreds of medical school potential interview questions online. And so I would just go through these. I made a little Word document of the ones that seemed to be the most common or the most, those common ones are just the ones that seem like the most probable that they would be asked. And I thought through these answers. I would maybe jot some notes of some, anecdotes I could talk about, or just, my thought process, or key points of that I wanted to address if I was asked that certain question. And then I practiced a lot. I had my parents help me. I had friends help me. You
said, here's 10 questions, or here's some questions, sit down and just ask me that.
Yeah. I had them kind of broken up by category of your activities or your personality questions. There's all these different questions you can ask you, all these different topics you can talk about. So I had them broken down and I give my dad this document and I was like, okay, go through this list, ask me any questions, just interview me. Mm-hmm. And then, did that. I did that probably at least half a dozen times. Not, you could do it for 15 minutes. Just be like, hey, ask me a couple questions. We have half an hour right now. Ask me a couple questions. If you're studying with some friends, go out and be like, hey, can you just ask me these questions? Can I just practice my why medicine question with you?
Would people laugh, or would they give you feedback, or were they just like, okay, here you go?
No, I think it was good. I think if you explain to them that hey, I just can you help me? The first couple times I tried to go through, even someone who had known that they wanted to do medicine for a very long time, even someone going through my why medicine question the first time.
Kind of hard to spit it out, huh?
It's hard to, because you don't, you can't talk for an hour for one question. So you have to, or you just being able to have an outline and be I would start talking, be wait, no, I actually don't want to say that. And just, you don't want that to happen during your actual interview. So
you don't want to memorize responses, but you should practice, kind of rehearse maybe what you would say, but not maybe thinking word for word. I need to memorize
do not
this.
memorize a script, because they could cut you off. Mm-hmm. They could be they have, your interview might have a time frame in mind of okay, so I have 30 seconds for this question. I'm going to ask this person. You might have a minute long answer rehearsed. Mm-hmm. And you only get through half the way and they're okay, we're moving on. Or they ask you a question in the middle of your response, and because they want to it should be a conversation. You should be adaptable. You should have your answer. You should have the general theme of your answer. You should memorize that, but you should not memorize a script of word for word what you will always say, because you never know what's going to happen in your interview. So at least being comfortable with your response.
So some of them, you found some questions you thought were the most common or likely to be asked. Yeah. And one of them that you and I talked about the other day was you felt like every interview that you go on, you should be prepared to tell them why this school, why did you apply to this school?
Yeah.
And I think I ask that question of everybody, especially from people who are from far, far away, like you.
No
and
connection to Ohio.
How did you
or
wind
Cleveland?
up in Cleveland? And so you should be prepared to respond to that kind of question. Let them know what was it about that what attracted you to add them to your AMCAS application?
Yeah, you
because there's
spent money.
152 med schools out there.
You spent money applying to this school. Like, why do you want to come here? Yeah. So I think just like being able to have at least a couple key points, like go through their website. If you have the opportunity, ask any current students like what they really like, research, online, like what people have been saying about this school or, what makes them unique, and just have a couple talking points prepared. And, you should have like a really good reason of like, if you were chosen to come here, if you really want to come here, like, tell me why.
Mm-hmm. I think it's okay too if you don't have a direct connection to Cleveland or to that city or that medical school, but to say, I maybe some friends who applied before they were like, hey, you should check this out. And then I did some reading on my own and it spoke to me. And so the more I read, the more I was interested, and I said, I'd throw my name in the hat and checked it off on AMCAS.
Or just like, do they have a certain interest group that sounds good to you? Do they have like, do they have a dual degree program that you want to apply to? Like, do you just like this city? And you're like, I've always wanted to live in this city or this region of the country. And so I, would like to do that at this medical school. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be like, the same thing for every school. It doesn't have, but just what's important to you and like, why does this school match up.
But I think
with
it's a good point you just made about finding something that maybe was in like the website of the med school or somewhere in the MSTAR that really I looked and was doing research and I found this really cool student organization that really appeals to me. And I think that's kind of something a little bit deeper that like you just didn't look at U.S. News and World Report rankings.
Yeah, you're
and
like,
then
you're ranked number 3.
Yeah, I went to the front page of your website and just read the front page. But like I really dove into all aspects of every nook and cranny of the websites and did as much research as I could find. And I found these really cool things that spoke to me. And that's why I'm here today. Yeah. A lot of schools, so at Case we do one-on-one interviews, but there's a fair number of med schools that do MMI, the multi-mini interviews. How did you prepare for that?
Yeah, I had a couple of those. Similar with how the traditional interviews, you can Google medical school MMI questions. And so I would, do that and I would look through them. And then there was actually a few websites that they would have the scenario or like a lot of them, if you've heard like their ethics questions or their like, what would you do in this situation questions? And then I would like, again, just think through my answer. I would, be like, get some friends, be like, hey, ask me these things or,
did you time yourself? Did you work with timing? Because some of those are all timed sessions. Do you remember if you did like timed responses?
I don't think I did. I might have. I made sure I wasn't talking for like 5 minutes at a time. But I don't think I ever like used a timer necessarily. I think I used a lot of these practice things just to make sure I had an idea in mind that if this question or similar question was asked, I could say something. I wasn't sitting there. It happens. I definitely had some interviews where someone asked me a question. I didn't have an answer prepared. And so I had to sit there for a couple seconds, which is totally fine. You just take a breath, be like, hey, I just need to think about that for a second.
And that's okay.
It's okay. But like, if you don't have to do that, that's also even better. So being able to just have been familiar with the topics or the types of questions that were asked. Yeah. So for MMI, like they can be anything. There is a lot of different, so I searched up, different like ethical scenarios that like, in medical school interviews that come up and then would think through that or use like resources to be like, oh, well, what is, the proper answer? Like what are the ethical guidelines for certain topics?
I see. So you did a fair amount of research for that. Yeah. What you just mentioned a minute ago, something about when if you get a question that a response doesn't immediately come to mind, and you said, can I take a moment to think about that? That is perfectly acceptable. Yeah. Or to say, that's a question I don't think I've thought of before. Can I think about it for a moment? And I've had that happen. Boy, almost every interview that I have with somebody, as long as I'm like, yeah, take a minute to think about it. It's a hard question.
And like, don't panic. Like, make sure you're
don't hyperventilate and don't take 10 minutes to think of a response either.
Yeah. Or just try to think of something that you could say, just something that, be like, hey, maybe this isn't exactly what you're asking, but I think this is what I heard. Is this, let's talk about this, or be like, does this answer your question? Even if you don't know, if maybe, the way that they phrased it just really confused you or caught you off guard, try to answer it and then be like, I don't know if that answered your question, but I'm willing to elaborate further. Like that's also a good strategy.
And then maybe I've had some applicants email me like if they're writing a thank you note, to say, remember that question you asked me? And I felt like I got through it, or I told you this, but the more I thought about it, I really wanted to, that was a good question I hadn't had before. And I came back to it after the interview. I just wanted to let you know, this is what I think about that. And I was like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's not a bad follow-up. So when it comes to practicing interviews, so you were out of school, so you had to kind of do this on your own. But if you are an undergrad and still in school, did there like career services or pre-med committees? Did you ever have that opportunity at Whitworth at your school?
Yeah, they did. So my school, they were really committed to making sure we were supporting the application process. So even though I was out of school, they set up a Skype like mock interview.
Really?
Yeah. So I was back at home. I had to wear my suit and my interview clothes, and I set up a Skype interview. And they even went through some MMI questions with me. They went through some of those general, more common questions with me, and they just did I think it was a good hour long mock interview. Wow. And then gave feedback.
Oh, good.
So I was lucky. So my school had a pre-med committee that did that. Lots of schools have pre-med committees, some don't. I think every school has this career services office that they always are there for people to do interview prep with. My school also had one. I didn't use it because I had the pre-med committee, but I knew other people who wanted more practice. So they would make an appointment with their career services office and do a mock interview. It doesn't have to be medical school related.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just interview practice of how to, comport yourself, how to speak, how to make sure that your answers are concise, how to make sure that you're answering the question that was asked, and how to be confident. I think that practice is really helpful.
I think practicing in your suit, as uncomfortable as it is, I'm impressed that your committee was wear your suit, or at least get dressed up, because most students aren't used to wearing coat and tie or a nice outfit and uncomfortable shoes and things like that. And that can be distracting. Sometimes I find people they're tugging on their sleeves, or you're adjusting, or just you're hot, and it can add another layer of uncomfortableness to an already kind of sometimes nerve-wracking situation. You're going to be nervous, but practicing in that can really just at least get that feeling, get those game day jitters maybe out of the way.
I think you can never prepare for every situation, but as long as you can try to, prepare for as many unexpected things that pop up as possible and at least get comfortable, it's just one less thing to worry about when you're actually in your interview.
Yeah. And somebody might tell you too that, boy, you keep tugging at your sleeves, you keep tugging at your tie. It's not a bad thing, but it can be distracting. It's a behavioral kind of pattern that can be distracting to the interviewer. Gosh, they kept yanking on their collar, they kept yanking on their fidgeting with something. Yeah, or
maybe you bounce a lot when you say, or I talk with my hands a lot. And so trying to make sure that those are more, it's not bad, but there's rein it in and do that.
Okay, so let's see. Oh, let's talk about, we're kind of talking about suits and things. What do you wear? So I think most people know that that's okay. This is a professional interview. So you're going to want to dress nicely. When it comes, give the female perspective. We talked about makeup and all kinds of stuff. Help me out there.
I had heard some crazy things oh, girls shouldn't wear makeup because it's not professional, or you shouldn't wear eyeliner or lipstick. And I wear that every day just as my normal getting ready routine. So I hear things of don't wear, you shouldn't stand out too much, but the people getting really oh, you should only wear white undershirts or something like that. You hear some crazy things during the interview, the application process from other people. I went and I got my suits from Macy's. Didn't spend too much on them. I'm short, so I had to get them tailored a little bit. Make sure that they fit properly. That's something that, something to think about too, is if you are getting your suit last minute, it might not fit perfectly, and you might want to leave room to get it tailored, and that might take a couple days, if not a week or two.
It's worth the money to get it tailored. It's not too expensive.
No, something like hemming I think was $10.
Yeah. I think people think that getting your suit tailored or your clothes, it's oh my gosh, gobs of money. It's usually not that much money just to have the legs kind of short, the pants shortened,
and it makes you feel more confident. It makes you feel, at least for me, more put together, and that made me feel more confident and more secure. When I was going over this, that was something I didn't didn't. So I was like, okay, at least that's one thing I can control. My suit fits. So I, got my suit. I got two. That was just me personally because I knew I had a lot of interviews back to back. That's something to consider too, is if you are having a lot of interviews back to back and you don't necessarily have time to get them dry cleaned, or,
what if you spill something at your lunch on your shirt?
You might get it, maybe you rip it accidentally. Just like things happen, just having a backup one. That was something that I made sure to do after I was, after I had scheduled two back to back. I was like, I'm not going to go drive or fly across the country if my suit in my little suitcase. And then what if I had brought a steamer with me, but like, what if I couldn't get it completely unwrinkled for the next interview the next day? I didn't want to show up to my next interview with the suit all wrinkled and all that. So
yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. What about the question that we hear sometimes is from applicants, like, what about perfume or cologne? And take it easy. I think it would be that take it easy on the perfume and cologne. We don't need to smell you before you come in the room, kind of thing. Yeah,
I think that goes with the you should stand out for the right reasons and not for the this person's wearing too much perfume reasons or
they have too much, like their makeup looks like they're going to the club.
Yeah. like I wore my natural everyday makeup, but I probably would caution against glittery eyeliner. But I mean, you do you.
Yeah.
But yeah. So just things like that. I think just the biggest thing is making sure that you planned your interview day outfit in advance. You've gotten your suit. You make sure that it fits correctly. If you've gotten new shoes, you've broken in your shoes.
Yeah, wear them a few times.
Yeah. The one thing I don't think something I really had thought of before interview days was that almost every school you have a tour. Some of them are half an hour long. Some of them can be over an hour long.
Who would have that?
Yeah. So when I went to Case's interview, they, at least at their old medical school building, because half of it was in the medical school building and then half of it was at their hospital that used to be right adjacent to it. Now it's about, maybe a 15-minute walk away, but it was over an hour long interview and my shoes were not broken in.
Why is that?
So another thing related to clothes that you should, and just interview process in general, is that you should make sure that you either have an interview checklist or that you double, triple check your suitcases before you fly or leave, farther from home that you can get back to easily. So my case interview, I guess I have all my fun stories from my case interview.
This is great. This is great.
It's great that I ended up here. But I had, luckily, most of my interviews, when I would fly, I got in the evening. That's another good tip, is if you can, try to get in as early as possible. The day before, never the morning before if you can help it. This case just happened to me where I got in at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. I was unpacking, it was my hotel room, unpacking my suitcase, hanging up my suit so it wouldn't get too wrinkled. And then I pulled out my two shoes, and they were two different shoes that I had packed for my interview the next day across the country. And they were just two different black heels, two different pairs. They were luckily a left and a right. And I probably could have made it work, but I'm okay, well, I have the time. I'm going to go see if there's a Marshall's or a Nordstrom Rack or something like that that's close enough that I can, I don't even know where I'm going to go buy new shoes at this late. I don't know. I've never been to the city before. I don't know where to go.
Oh my gosh.
So I got an Uber, went to a Nordstrom Rack close by. I found heels that fit well enough. Obviously did not have time to break them in. And then Case was definitely one of the longest tours that I had been on for any interview. And
you're like, oh my gosh, when is this going to be over?
Yeah. So I had my new shoes. I was late to or not late. I was 5 minutes before the required check-in time.
Boy, well, the stars were not in line for getting
definitely
here.
A little flustered, but that's actually a really good tip though, is that things can go wrong, and I think you just have to roll with it, and not everything's going to go smoothly every single time. That doesn't mean that you're not meant to go to that school. It doesn't mean that you're not, a good applicant. It doesn't mean that you're not prepared. Things just happen.
But you got to rise up.
Yeah. And I knew every time since then, every single interview I went on, I triple checked my shoes, and I would hold them and I would look at them and put them in my suitcase. These are two of the same pair.
I have to tell you that if you wore two different shoes, that's a level of detail that I probably wouldn't have noticed. Whether it had a chunky heel or
probably wouldn't have, but it was just something where it's if I have the time to change it, I'm going to go see if I can fix it.
Yeah. I've had some applicants when it comes to the tour, some of the the females, like the girls, they'll say, like, can we change into different shoes for the tour? I'm like, yeah, whatever. Go pull out your sneakers.
Just walking.
Yeah. So some people brought different shoes for the tour.
See, I never thought about that. See, that would have been.
I mean, we're pretty like reasonable. Like, okay, sure, whatever you want to do. Like, I don't care.
Yeah, I think the discussion too between like I've heard things with like between heels and flats, and like I don't think it matters. I think just the big takeaway from like what you should wear is make sure it looks professional. It's business like formal, so it's the dark suit. Make sure that everything looks nice, looks neat, but don't overthink it. Yeah.
Okay, so just to kind of hit the back chapter of what we've been talking about, we just were kind of, this is a good segue talking about, prepare for the worst, because the worst might happen. We talked about being prepared, making maybe a checklist like that you pack for your interview day. I always recommend to applicants sometimes take a few minutes, look on YouTube for like how to iron a shirt. Because if you pack your shirt, if you're not used to ironing things, I remember when I was 20, whatever, I don't even think I knew what an iron looked like. I just would kind of hand it when I was home and give it to my mom, and it just came back magically kind of, looking nice. But then when I was on my own, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So now that the magic of YouTube, there are videos that say, here's how to iron a shirt. And you can do that in your hotel or whatever, just to kind of get out those wrinkles and things.
Yeah, like hotels have irons. I bought a travel steamer, like a little mini steamer that I brought with me in case I need, and I used it, I think, for every interview, just because I was flying for so much and packing is hard.
When you look back now, so you were interviewing a year ago, what was a part of the application that did you think like, wait, gosh, there's something in my application I feel like I'm lacking, or that you worried about, that you're like, okay, I'm lacking this, but that's okay. We're talking about like this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So like something for me is like, I didn't have a lot of research experience when I applied to medical school. I had done like 2 summers of some research, didn't have any publications. You hear about that a lot. Of you think like everyone around you is getting like these first author publications and, almost winning Nobel Prizes and, all that. But like, so I felt really insecure about one thing was like my research experience, and especially for Case, someone who's so well, like a school that's so well known for their being such a big research powerhouse. I definitely felt a little bit inadequate, and I was able to talk about research, and I was able to talk about like what I liked and what I wanted to do while I was at Case. But that was something where it's like, talking to their interviewees who their gap year jobs are clinical research and
at the NIH doing IRTA,
all this stuff. And so that was something that like I felt insecure about, but I also, even going to a school that was so well known for research, like I got in. And then another thing too, that like I went to a small no-name college. You go on the interview. Name? I mean, I love Whitworth. It's definitely one where when you're introducing yourself to other interviews, or even when I got here during orientation, people were like, where's Spokane?
Yeah, right.
So, you got all these people who are coming from Princeton and, UCLA and, Northwestern, and it can get a little bit intimidating if you're someone who's from, maybe a more regional school, or a school that's smaller, a liberal arts school. That was something that I was definitely insecure about. You look around the name tags on the interview day and you got people from Harvard and Yale, and then they'd be like, oh, where are you from? But I think it's just something of like, you just don't compare yourself to anyone else. Like, say
that again.
Yeah, just like,
don't compare yourself to other people.
Your application is your own. You have your own strengths. Like just because I didn't have a lot of research, I also did so many other things. I had so many other, thought really strong parts of my application that obviously resonated with admissions people. And it was something where it's like, if you have a part where your application's lacking, make sure you have other things that make up for it and that you can talk about. And like, maybe you just weren't passionate about that check box that everyone else, you think you're supposed to do, but you did so much more leadership. You did so much more volunteering, or you did do so much research, but you didn't have a lot of opportunities for other things or for study abroad. I think just making sure that you do things that make you happy and make you stand out, as opposed to trying to be like the person next to you or what you think that the school wants you to be is, you should just be yourself.
Play to your strengths.
Yeah.
Like we wrote play to your strengths.
Yeah.
And I think if you're there on an interview day, you have just as equal chance of getting in as everybody else that's there.
They've read through your file. They saw what you have.
Right.
Like, don't be worried like, oh, is my MCAT too low?
This wasn't an accident that you're here.
Yeah, but it's like, oh, is my MCAT too low? My GPA is on the grades. Like, you got here. Like, they obviously wanted you to be here enough to interview you. And it's just like, it's up to you now to make sure that comes across, so that you want to be here.
I'll say one thing that we've done for our interview days is that we used to put the name of the school underneath where people were from, just because we thought, that people would want to know kind of what, maybe you're from California or you're from Pennsylvania. But we started to think that maybe that causes another level of some anxiety or just some stress to see like, oh, they're from this named school. I'm not, maybe I feel like I'm competing with. So we just got rid of that altogether.
Yeah.
And just so I'm sure people could find out, we talk to each other where they're from, but it's just not sticking out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just making sure that like, be
it comes
yourself.
down, don't compare yourself to other people.
Don't compare like what interviews other people are going on. Don't compare where they're getting interviews at. You're here. Like, you're doing great.
When you were thinking about the schools that you wanted to attend, you're kind of weighing those decisions. What things were you prioritizing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was lucky that I had options. I went on a lot of interviews. I got multiple acceptances. So when I was on my interview days, I had a couple things in the back of my mind where I had my envision of like my perfect school. And so for me, I had things that were important to me. Like, I know I really wanted a school that was collaborative. I wanted a school where my classmates could also be my friends, and we weren't feeling like we were competing and cutthroat, and like there wasn't, that sort of dynamic with the classmates. So I wanted a school that I felt supported, and I felt that like I would be happy at for the next 4 years. So I'd go to these interviews and I would ask questions that reflected that. I was asked my interviewer, like, how do they, like, what do they think of their students? Do they think that their students are happy? Like, what do they think of the class that they've built? And ask the tour guides or the people at the lunches, like, do you socialize with your classmates outside of class? Like, are you friends with your classmates? Did you find that
elicited some responses that like made you think, okay, something to keep in mind?
Yeah. Like, I mean, definitely just like looking at if they're like, oh yeah, we, do movie nights, every week, or, we, study, but then we also, go out to dinner afterwards. Like, that's something where I was like, yeah, like, cause you can't, medical school is hard. Any medical school you go to is going to be stressful. It's going to be hard. But you also can't study 24/7. And I feel like being able to have a school where you can have that downtime, that time for yourself, that time where you can build a support network with your classmates, like that was something for me that was a huge priority. So I made sure when I was on interviews to elicit those responses. Other people might be research. You might be like, I have a super specific research interest, and I'm going to ask if they have faculty that can, support me in that. Or if you want to do, a dual degree, and if they have that dual degree program, how many people go into that, like how well that meshes with their actual medical school curriculum. Like I think just like having these priorities for you of like what is your ideal medical school, because like at the same time, like if you got into this place, like they're obviously interviewing you and they're trying to make sure that you're a good fit for them, but you want to make sure that you're going to be a good fit too, and make sure that you're going to be happy there. Like, you could go to the best medical school in the country, but if you're unhappy for 4 years, like,
4 years is a long time to be unhappy.
It's a long time. And medical school is hard. And I am so lucky that I'm at this place where like I have such good friends that I, got a really good support network really fast, and we can all complain about how much studying we have to do together, but also, help teach each other the really difficult concepts. So I think just making sure like having, they give you almost every interview I went on, there were so many opportunities to ask questions. Every interviewer always left time to be like, okay, do you have any questions for me?
So bring your own questions.
Bring your own questions, and bring questions that reflect, like, you can Google that too. You can Google what questions should you ask an interviewer, but I feel like tailoring those to help you, like, in your own mind, maybe like rank those schools. So if you are lucky enough to get multiple acceptances, you can kind of decide, where would I be happiest and what's important to me.
What are some of the pros and the cons, like, but things that I really am looking for, wants and needs in the school.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing. I think the AAMC has a list of, they used to have a website called 35 Questions I Wish I Would Have Asked. Or something like that. And so I'll find the link and I'll put it in the show notes, because it has a number of, they're by category, like by curriculum, by admissions process, by student life, by financial aid, and those kind of things. So if you're looking for questions, if you kind of don't know where to start, that can help, I think, kind of get the juices flowing, and then you can maybe tailor them to the specific things that you might want to ask a med school. So one thing we talked about when we were getting together, like, what if you have an interview that you just didn't feel, when it didn't go as well as you kind of hoped? Like, did you beat yourself up over it, or like, how did you have one where you kind of felt like,
I definitely had questions that people would ask me, or like, I had a couple instances where someone asked me a question and I would freeze, or my answer was just like not the best or something like that. Or like, interviews where you felt like, okay, that could have definitely gone better. Maybe you just didn't click with your interviewer and you felt that, this definitely wasn't my best interview. I think something that is really good is to think like why that happened. So I think being like, okay, I got really tripped up on my why medicine question. So I guess I'm going to go home. I'm going to practice that a couple more times, like with my friends or with my family. Or like, maybe you just like were tired that day and be like, maybe I just need to get more sleep. Maybe I need to prepare more of, my logistics of how to get to my interview. Just things like that, of reflecting on like why maybe why you didn't have the best interview. And then moving forward, because, just because you thought you didn't have a good interview doesn't mean that your interviewer thought you had a bad interview. And like, I was talking to friends who like thought they said that they had they would have what they thought were horrible interviews, that they just didn't think they did well. They're like, oh, my interviewer just seemed to like really not like me, or they just not that click, or like, I just know that I messed up on some of the important questions, and they ended up getting in. Yeah. And like, it's just one of those things where like the application process is crazy. And sometimes it feels very random, even if it's not. But like, I think just not beating yourself up over it, and being able to be like, okay, so like that one was not the best, but you know what? I have, 2 more to go on this month. We're just going to, try to focus on the positives. We're going to move forward. Don't think about your bad interview during your next interview.
Maybe you and I, when we were kind of talking the other day in anticipation of this, was to jot some notes down, like afterward, do some like reflection, like, okay, like what did I think I did well? What kind of questions was I asked? Then maybe jot those questions down again, and then go back over them, or think about when you're on the plane flying home, like, what could I have done differently on this whole interview day? Was it, should I have taken the Uber to get there instead of running and being late or feeling really anxious? Should I have, prepared this certain question in a different way, and that kind of thing? So it doesn't probably hurt to jot some notes down like right afterward, while those emotions and those feelings are fresh, so that you can come back to them in a couple weeks. Exactly.
I think just making sure that you realize what you did wrong, but also work to improve it for the next time.
What if you're on a wait list? We wrote down like, that's not a no.
No. Yeah. Like I have a lot of friends who are in my class right now who got an awfully wait list, who, they really, thought they had a great interview. They got on a wait list, and then they didn't, they heard back, in April or May. And then, so they were stressed all that until that time, but then they got in. And so like a wait list doesn't mean it's a no.
Yeah.
A wait list is not a rejection. So
there's an interview I did with my friend at Vanderbilt. And if you haven't listened to that one yet, go listen. It's like episode number 4 or something, but it's with Jen Kimball. She's from Vanderbilt, and she had the best analogy for a wait list, and that's okay. She had the best analogy for the wait list, and it's like you're in a holding pattern on a plane. Like there's nothing wrong with the plane. There's just not room yet to land, kind of thing. And so she said she had a great analogy. The way she described it, I was like, that's really good. It's a great way to think about it. It's not like, there's never, people call it wait list or alternate list. It's just, we don't have enough room right now. But gosh darn it, if you're there on the wait list, we hope to get to you. Yeah. So it just...
You never know.
It's tough.
Yeah. You don't know until you know.
Yep,
until you get a definite answer, you don't know.
That's right. Well, okay. I guess just to kind of wrap things up, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you felt like we needed to get out there?
I think just like the biggest part of interviews is like, yes, it's stressful and yes, it's extremely important and you're so excited because you've probably been working towards this goal for years, but have fun with it too. Like enjoy the time to travel, enjoy the time to meet new people. I like one thing I didn't expect during interviews was like, there's a couple people who I met who I saw on different interviews, or there's one girl who I met at, one of my other interviews, and now she's one of my classmates. Mm-hmm. And so you don't know who you're going to meet on this interview trail. You don't know, like, you know, maybe there'll be a future colleague, maybe there'll be a future classmate. Like, it's just have fun with it and like prepare, but also be patient. It's such a long process. And, you know, you might, you know, hear about other people getting interviews at a certain school and be like, why haven't they gotten to me yet? But just like, trust the process, I guess. And like, I know it's hard. I remember being so stressed and constantly refreshing my emails and being like, why hasn't this school gotten back to me? Or like, why haven't I heard from the school I applied to like 2 months ago? But you know, it'll all work itself out. And just, I think being positive and being patient and like, it's some things like you've worked so hard, you've been able to control so much of your application, but once you get in the interview process, it's just a little bit out of your hands, and be able to accept that and let the process happen.
I can tell you from our side of that, I know some applicants will say, you know, my friend heard from Case, but they haven't heard, I haven't heard from you. And it jumps just we're at this time of year, we're in October right now. Med schools are swimming in applications, and we're trying to get to them as fast as we can. Sometimes the way they're sent out to screeners can be different, and so it just so happens that somebody else who applied last week is getting put into a queue, and for somebody, and
it's not a value judgment on your application necessarily. It just means that volume. Like this is where you're at in the pile right now.
Right, it's just volume. I mean, med schools right now are all swimming in volume.
Most of my friends, like I was lucky enough to get a really early interview at Case, but a lot of my friends didn't get their interview like till February, or they got a lot of late interviews in like March. And, you know, that doesn't mean like they're amazing students. They're amazing classmates. Like that's not a value judgment on them. Like they probably had amazing applications, and it's just the timing.
Yep. The timing has nothing to do with it. Let's see. Enjoy it. We said, have a little fun. Mm-hmm. Don't be closed off on these interview days. They try to have a good time. You're going to be nervous.
Yeah.
Enjoy the travel. Did you enjoy all the travel?
I loved it. I hadn't ever been to the East Coast before my interviews, actually. So that was really, I had never been to the Midwest. And so like, that was really fun. Like I had one in Washington, D.C. where I got done my interview day early and got to walk around the National Mall for 5 hours. Mm-hmm. Or I had one in other cities where you can go do touristy things if you have time. Like, it's fun. You get to meet new people. You get to see new places. You get to envision your life in this different city if you want to move away from home. I think it was exciting. It was also a good way to distract from the long process, and just like, you know, distract from your nerves, is being like, this is fun too. You've worked so hard.
You're gonna meet a lot of people.
And you're finally here.
Some people might end up being your roommate. You're like your classmates. You might see them at multiple interviews. Does that ever happen to you?
One girl at a different interview, she's now one of my classmates. And then two of my friends, actually, they had met on their interview day for Case, and then they're both from Florida, and they're both on the same flight to their second look weekend, and then one of them was my second look weekend roommate, so then I met both of them, and now they're two of my really closest friends.
Oh my gosh!
In my class right now, so like they, you know, met really early on, and then we all kind of met together. So you just never know what's going to happen. It's a scary process. It's a frustrating process. It's a long process, but it's also can be really fun. It's also really rewarding because you worked so hard for so many years to get to this point, and like to be able to go on interviews and then to like one day get that acceptance is like a really, really great feeling.
Yeah, that's awesome. What resources would you recommend to people for, say, let's talk about medically related resources that maybe you used, and then just things like books or blogs or podcasts or things that you recommend to people that you just find fun and tell people about?
Yeah. So like medical school stuff, like I use the MSAR. That's like a pretty classic one. So talking with my friends, like I didn't use like YouTube stuff or bloggers, but my one friend knew some like bloggers. There's Pre-Rock and Car Beauty that gave like good MCAT advice. They were both medical school or medical students who
like I know that guy at Pre-Rock.
Yeah.
I interviewed him.
Did
actually.
You? Yeah. My one friend Abby, she told me she listened to him. And
He's a YouTube guy.
Yeah. So she did that when she was interviewing and got some good tips from him.
I'll put these links in the show notes.
Yeah.
But I remember I saw that. I'm like, I interviewed this dude.
Yeah. I never heard of him, but she said he was great. Yeah. I use Reddit a lot. So like the website Reddit. So there's like a pre-med subreddit for that. There's an MCAT one for MCAT prep. So it's like just a good way. It's like kind of like a forum for students to ask questions, to complain together about the process and express their, joys and their frustrations and get support from other strangers on the internet. So I would like look at those and, be like, oh, that's a good question someone asked. I never thought about that. Or, oh, that's a good like interview day tip or travel process tip. Yeah. The pre-med podcast by Dr. Ryan Gray.
Yep.
I listened to a lot of those. Mm-hmm. The pre-med headquarters, I did that. Listened to a lot of his stuff.
He's got a ton of resources.
Yeah, really, really good resources on like MCAT stuff, on how to be a pre-med. Really good stuff. He has I think a couple of books out too, like on the MCAT and on interviewing. I think I bought his interview book. It's had a lot of really good questions in there of like potential medical school interview questions and sample answers. So I liked that.
Yeah,
that
get into that stuff. And I'll put links to all this stuff out there.
Yeah. Oh, and then the undifferentiated medical school.
I've heard of it.
Medical student. Yes, by a former case student, a recent case grad. I had friends who would.
How did you use that?
I didn't start listening to that one until after Second Look when they told us about it. But I had a lot of friends who like during Second Look or now in my class, I was like, yeah, I listened to this guy for like months or for like, a really long time and loved. It's just like a good way to. I definitely used it. Before I got to medical school as like a motivator too, of like he interviews a bunch of different doctors from various specialties and asks them all the same questions. He can get a really good detailed comparison. And like, it's a good way to be like, oh, like I never thought about doing like ENT or like neurosurgery or things like that. But it's also a way to be like, wow, like I could be these people one day, and a good motivator and good get excited about medical school and medicine in general.
He's killing it.
Yeah.
How about Khan Academy? How did you use that?
Oh yeah, I watched Khan Academy videos a lot during my MCAT prep. Khan Academy is a great resource. They even have practice questions, I think, too, and they have really, really great videos that like really concisely and easily to understand explain these different like concepts that like appear on the MCAT.
And
so that
free.
was good. And it's free. You have to pay for it. I think everything else you have to pay for. At least that one's free.
Well, this has been really cool. Thanks for coming to do this.
Of course. Thank you so much. Had a great time.
This has been really helpful. I guess we'll just wrap it up there. Thanks so much for doing this, Megan. It's been awesome.
Thank you
Good
too.
All right.
All right.